Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. Grab your seat, because what happened last Saturday shattered what I thought was a steady marriage. And it all started with a dance floor, a drink in her hand, and the one sentence I never thought I'd say. The music was loud enough to hide the sound of heartbreak. From the balcony, I could see her, center of the room, spinning in that silver dress she promised she only bought for fun. It was a benefit gala, but you'd think it was a casting call for people pretending not to be married. She was dancing with him again. Brody, the man she introduced to me as just someone who handles vendor logistics. Vendor logistics, my foot. I wasn't supposed to be there. She told me it was mostly corporate, that I'd be bored, that I wouldn't get it. So I stayed home until I didn't. Something told me to show up. So I did. I didn't announce myself. I didn't walk in through the main entrance. I stood above it all, holding the railing, and watched her laugh into his ear like he was her secret. They danced like there was no audience, like there were no rings, like I didn't exist. And that's when I remembered the butter. Yes, butter. 3 nights ago, I accidentally spilled a bit on her blouse while we were eating takeout. She looked at me like I'd thrown acid, didn't say a word, just got up and changed. That same woman was now holding hands with another man like she forgot I ever brought her soup when she was sick. I left, quietly. I didn't want a scene. But when she came home later that night, smelling like roses and guilt, I was sitting in the kitchen. She walked in, paused, and smiled like she had nothing to hide. "Hey," she said, hanging up her purse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask where she was. I just looked at her and said, "If you go back and dance with him again, this conversation won't happen the same way later." She froze. I watched every micro-expression on her face. Confusion, then indignation, then that fake calmness she uses when she's scrambling. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You know exactly what it means," I replied, my voice low. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. She didn't look scared of losing me. She looked annoyed that I finally noticed. That's when I knew. I hadn't lost her tonight. I'd already lost her. And now, I was just the guy still too polite to admit it. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there in the hallway, clutching the strap of her purse like she wasn't sure whether to defend herself or bolt back out the door. The silence between us was loud. So loud it made the clinking of the ice in her water bottle sound like an alarm. I waited, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd say something honest. But instead, she scoffed. "You're being dramatic, Corbin. It was a dance. At a fundraiser. That's what people do there, dance. Sorry if you can't handle that." And just like that, she dismissed the moment as if it hadn't swallowed me whole. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw accusations. I just nodded and said, "You're right. I can't handle it." That threw her off. She expected a fight. What she got was a resignation letter written in my eyes. She walked past me like the conversation was done. I stood in the kitchen alone, hearing the soft click of her heels on the stairs, followed by the creak of our bedroom door. The bedroom that hadn't felt like ours in months. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while she scrolled through her phone, pretending not to notice me. I couldn't help myself. I asked, "Did you enjoy dancing with him?" She didn't even look up. "I enjoyed the evening. Everyone was in a good mood. You should have come." Right? I should have come. To a party I wasn't invited to. To watch my wife spin in another man's arms while I stood holding a glass of water and pretending not to care. The next morning she left early. Said she had a yoga class. Her phone buzzed while she was in the shower. I didn't go through it. I didn't have to. The preview showed the message. "You've got rhythm. Let's find another excuse to move." From Brody. No emojis. Just enough ambiguity to deny intent. But plenty for my stomach to turn. I didn't say anything when she came back. I made pancakes as usual. She said thanks as usual. We ate in silence as usual. And then it happened. Her phone lit up again. This time I did look. A photo of them. At the gala. Arms wrapped around each other. Not posted publicly. Sent to her directly from someone else, probably a coworker. She laughed quietly, then turned the screen toward me with a smirk. Do you still think I'm doing something wrong? I stared at the image. Her body pressed against his, their faces inches apart. Her smile brighter than I'd seen in weeks. I don't think you're doing anything wrong, I said. I think you already did. Her smile faded. She put the phone down and stood up, leaving her half-eaten plate behind. She didn't say a word as she walked upstairs. And I didn't stop her. I didn't know it then, but the line had already been crossed. The next step wasn't dancing. It was disappearing. The air between us stayed frozen for days. We moved around each other like ghosts, silent, polite, mechanical. She still watered the plants. I still took out the trash. But every smile she gave me felt like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't until Thursday night that something finally cracked. I was in the living room folding laundry. She walked in wearing jeans I hadn't seen before and a tight beige sweater that didn't look like her style, at least not the version of her that lived with me. I'm going to a late work meeting, she said casually, grabbing her keys without looking at me. A work meeting at 8:45 p.m. In full makeup and perfume. Of course. I asked where it was, just to see what lie she'd settle on. Downtown. The lounge across from Leith's. You know, the one with the rooftop? My heart sank. That place had music, drinks, and dim lighting. Not exactly the ideal backdrop for a financial planning session. I didn't argue. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "Are you going with him?" Her reaction wasn't guilt. It was annoyance. "Corbin, if you're going to start another fight, don't bother. I'm not in the mood for insecurity tonight." Then she left. No kiss, no goodbye. Just the soft clink of the front door and the buzz of the lock engaging behind her. I stared at that door for 10 full minutes. Something in me was screaming not to just sit there again, not to let her disappear into another lie. So I followed her. I know how that sounds, but I needed to know the truth, even if it broke me. I waited 5 minutes, threw on a hoodie, and drove downtown. I parked far enough from the rooftop lounge to avoid being seen and walked up the alley to the side entrance. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Maybe a table full of coworkers laughing over spreadsheets and sangria. But what I saw instead made my knees feel hollow. She was already there. So was he. They weren't sitting across from each other like coworkers. They were side by side, pressed together, laughing at something on his phone. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and she leaned her head on his shoulder like it was natural, like it had happened before. My mouth went dry. I felt pathetic, useless. But worse than that, I felt numb. I took one blurry photo with my phone. Not for revenge, but to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. Then I walked away. I didn't confront her. I didn't burst in and cause a scene. I got back in my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror for almost an hour. I wasn't the husband anymore. I was the placeholder, the backup plan, the fool still cooking pancakes while she planned her exit. When she came home just after midnight, she moved around like everything was normal. She even hummed to herself in the bathroom. I stayed in bed with my back to her, gripping my phone with the photo still open, heart pounding, stomach tight. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, more to myself than to her. "This conversation is over." She didn't hear me, but next time, she will. The next morning, she made coffee like nothing had happened, casually humming some pop song as she scrolled through her phone in the kitchen. I sat across the table from her, staring down into my untouched mug. That photo still burned into my memory. I wanted to ask her how it felt, leaning into another man while her wedding ring sat in a drawer upstairs, probably collecting dust. But I stayed quiet. Cowardly, I guess. Or maybe exhausted. We ate in silence, her tapping the spoon on her yogurt cup while I tried to suppress the storm inside me. At one point, she glanced up and asked, "Are you okay?" The question felt insulting. I nodded without speaking. Of course I wasn't okay. But I think she already knew that and just wanted to confirm I wouldn't cause a scene. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I answered client emails on autopilot, barely reading what they said. I kept checking my phone, not for her messages, She hadn't texted me all day, but because I kept staring at that one photo, wondering when exactly she had stopped choosing me. When had I become a chore? An obligation? A background character in her new life? I called my best friend, Mason, who I hadn't seen in months. He always had this blunt way of cutting through my overthinking. When I told him everything, the dancing, the texts, the rooftop bar, he didn't even pause before saying, "You know she's not just flirting, right? This isn't office banter. She's already left you emotionally. You're just the last one to find out." It hit harder than I expected, because it didn't sound like an opinion. It sounded like a conclusion. I didn't go home right away that night. I parked outside the local gym and just sat there in my car, trying to work up the nerve to go inside. Not to work out. I hadn't touched a treadmill in over a year, but just to move, to do something, to feel like I still had control over some part of my life. I ended up walking in, swiping a dusty membership card, and spending 20 minutes on a bike that made my knees ache. But somehow, sweating felt better than sitting in silence at home. I left exhausted but slightly more alive. When I finally walked through the door, she was already on the couch, wearing that same beige sweater she wore with him, legs tucked under her, a bowl of popcorn in her lap. "You're late," she said without looking away from the screen. "I texted you." I checked my phone. One message. "Hey, you good?" Sent 2 hours ago. I nodded again, dropped my keys on the table and said, "I just needed time." She glanced over and squinted. "Have you been crying?" I shrugged. "Maybe." She didn't ask why. Just turned back to her show like my pain was background noise. That's when I decided. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to prepare. Quietly, carefully. Because if she was going to rewrite the rules, I wasn't going to sit there and play along anymore. That night, while she slept beside me like everything was normal, I emailed a lawyer. I wasn't sure yet if I had the strength to go through with anything. But for the first time in months, I had a plan. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who Googles things like quiet ways to prepare for divorce. But there I was, hiding in the guest bathroom with the fan running, reading articles like they were survival guides. My hands were shaking. Not because I was afraid of being alone, but because I realized I already was. The version of Celia I fell in love with didn't live here anymore. This version. She belonged to someone else, even if her address hadn't changed yet. I spoke with a lawyer over the phone during my lunch break the next day. Her name was Rochelle, and she had this calm, surgical way of asking questions that made everything sound manageable. "Do you have evidence?" she asked. I hesitated. "I have a photo. I have text messages. I don't have, anything explicit." Rochelle didn't flinch. "That's okay. If you're not pursuing fault, it's more about clarity than blame." She explained what to expect, what the timelines looked like, how to separate finances cleanly. It felt surreal, like I was planning a vacation to a place I never wanted to visit. But weirdly, it gave me a sliver of control, something I hadn't felt in weeks. I didn't mention a word to Celia, not that night or the next. Instead, I started observing her like a stranger. I watched the way she texted with her phone tilted away from me, the way she took longer showers, the way she stopped asking if I wanted to watch a movie together and just vanished upstairs with her AirPods. Every moment became a signal I couldn't unsee. Then, the final shift came on a Wednesday. She got a call while we were both in the kitchen. I heard the tone in her voice change the moment she answered. Higher, softer, more playful. She stepped out onto the patio, pacing like a teenager sneaking a phone call. I didn't even try to listen in. I didn't have to. She came back in 10 minutes later with this strange glow on her face. Not guilt, not shame, just happiness. Not the kind I could take credit for. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk in the spare room and pulled out an old notebook I used to write in during college. I made a list, not of what she did, but of who I had become. Quiet, apologetic, emotionally starved. I barely recognized the man in my own handwriting. So I made another list. A short one. Just 3 words. Get smart. The next morning I went through our joint accounts. I printed out what I needed. I made copies of the mortgage papers. I took photos of the documents she'd forgotten I even had access to. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the pieces of me she no longer saw as worth protecting. She noticed my change in energy almost immediately. That night, while brushing her teeth, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "You've been weird lately. Everything okay?" I smiled. Not wide, not fake, just enough to confuse her. "I'm okay now," I said. "Really?" She narrowed her eyes but didn't press. Maybe part of her felt the balance shifting. Maybe, deep down, she knew the script was changing. She just didn't know I'd already written the next scene. That Friday, she wore red. I'd only seen that dress once before, years ago on our 3rd anniversary. Back then, she'd worn it just for me, spinning in front of our bedroom mirror, asking if I thought it was too much. Now, she didn't ask. She didn't even glance at me as she adjusted her earrings in the hallway mirror. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her apply lipstick like she was getting ready for someone else's approval, and I guess she was. "You look nice," I said, keeping my voice steady. She paused for a moment, then smiled without turning. "Thanks. It's a client dinner. Might go late." She grabbed her clutch. No kiss, no goodbye, just the faint scent of vanilla and a trail of indifference behind her. I waited 15 minutes before leaving. This time, I wasn't going to stand in the shadows like some heartbroken amateur. I'd made arrangements, not to ambush her, not to scream or cry or beg. No, I was past that. I was going to make sure I wasn't crazy. Because the thing that eats you alive isn't just the betrayal, it's the gaslighting. The way they make you feel delusional for noticing the truth. I parked across from the restaurant she'd named weeks ago as her new favorite client spot. I didn't have to wait long. She arrived just after 9. He was already there, Brody, in some gray jacket that tried too hard to be casual. He stood when she walked in and kissed her cheek like they'd done it 100 times. They weren't seated at the bar. They had a reservation. Private table. Wine already opened. This wasn't spontaneous. This was scheduled. I didn't take a photo this time. I didn't need one. Instead, I sent a message to someone else. Mason. He showed up 10 minutes later and slipped into the passenger seat. He didn't say anything at first, just stared through the windshield at the scene playing out across the street. "You want me to drag him out by his jacket?" he finally asked. I laughed, bitterly. "No, I want you to watch. So later, when I tell the story, someone else knows I wasn't imagining it." We sat there for 20 more minutes. Celia leaned across the table, touched Brody's hand once, laughed with her whole body like she used to with me. Then he pulled out something from his jacket. A little box. I couldn't see what was inside, but she gasped, covered her mouth, then leaned in to hug him. Not the kind of hug you give a colleague. "That's enough," I whispered. Mason didn't say a word. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder once. Then I drove home. She got back after midnight. I was already in bed, facing the window, eyes open. She didn't say anything, just slipped under the covers, her back to mine, like always. But this time, there was no ache in my chest, no trembling hands, only silence. Clean, cold, decisive silence. Because earlier that evening, while they were laughing over wine, I signed the papers. They were in an envelope under my pillow. She just didn't know it yet. Saturday morning felt like the world had paused. The sunlight was pouring through the blinds like it didn't know what was coming. I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee I didn't even want, just listening to the quiet. The birds chirped outside like it was any other weekend. But it wasn't. Not for me. Not anymore. I heard her footsteps upstairs, the familiar sound of the closet door sliding open, drawers closing. She was humming to herself. The same woman who'd left last night smelling like cheap wine and someone else's cologne was now humming like she hadn't just detonated everything we built. I had the envelope in my hand. The divorce papers inside felt heavier than they should have been. Final. Sharp. Not angry, just done. There was no grand speech written. No dramatic confrontation. I wasn't doing this for theater. I was doing it for peace. When she finally came downstairs, she was wearing a hoodie and yoga pants, hair pulled into a messy bun like the past 2 months of betrayal hadn't turned her into a stranger. She barely looked at me as she reached for a banana and muttered, "I'll be gone for a few hours. Spa day with the girls." Her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up. "Brody, hotel's all set. Can't wait to see you like that again." She saw me glance at it. Didn't care. That was it. That was the moment I knew she didn't expect consequences. I wasn't a threat. I was just the guy who'd keep making coffee and looking the other way while she played pretend. So I stood up, walked over, and placed the envelope gently beside her on the counter. "What's this?" she asked, her tone almost bored. "You'll figure it out," I said. "Read it carefully." She opened the envelope like it was junk mail. The moment her eyes registered the first page, her smile evaporated. She looked up, blinking like she'd misread something. "Corbin, what is this? A joke?" "No," I said, with more calm than I'd felt in months. "This is clarity." She laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "Are you serious right now? You're divorcing me because I danced with someone?" I tilted my head. "No. I'm divorcing you because I stopped matching. Because you built a new life and left me behind while pretending you didn't. Because you thought I wouldn't notice you falling in love with someone else right in front of me." She looked stunned for a second. Just a second. Then the mask slipped off, and she snapped, "You're being pathetic. I haven't even done anything physical." I let that sit between us. The room felt smaller now. "Your heart left a long time ago," I said. "Your body was just the last to catch up." She reached for the papers again, flipping through them like she might find a loophole. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I regret staying quiet this long." She stood there frozen, one hand on the envelope, the other clenched at her side. For the first time, I wasn't the one holding my breath. She was, and I wasn't going to save her this time. She didn't cry. That's the part I'll remember most. No tears. No apology. Just silence, followed by denial, followed by indifference. As if my decision was some inconvenient detour in the story she had already written for herself. She shoved the envelope back on the counter like it offended her and said, "Fine. Do what you want. You'll be crawling back within 6 months." Then she left. No dramatic exit. Just the slam of the door and the echo of everything she didn't say. But I didn't collapse. I didn't sit on the floor and break down like I thought I would. I actually stood there, breathing. Felt like I was inhaling air for the first time in months. Pure, uncluttered, mine. I went upstairs, gathered the few things I cared about, and spent the night at Mason's. We didn't talk much. He handed me a beer, nodded, and let me have the couch. That gesture said more than any words could. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. My lawyer filed everything. The house? I let her keep it. I didn't want the memories, the echoes in the walls, the ghosts of a marriage she abandoned long before I had the courage to accept it. I found a small place near the lake. Nothing fancy, but peaceful. And most importantly, mine. She sent a few texts, passive ones. "I hope you're doing okay. This feels unnecessary. You're not even trying to work through it." I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because I was finally free from trying to earn love from someone who had already spent it elsewhere. And here's the part one didn't expect. I started laughing again. At dumb movies. At bad jokes. I slept through the night. I read books. I remembered who I was before I became a placeholder in my own life. One Saturday morning, sitting on the porch with coffee and a pen, I started writing again. Not Reddit posts, actual journal entries. Pages that weren't filled with confusion or desperation, but gratitude. I had lost something, yes, but I had found something greater. My voice, my dignity, and the realization that silence isn't strength, it's suffocation. So if you're out there reading this, stuck in the shadows of someone else's spotlight, let me say what I wish someone had told me months ago. You don't need proof to know you're being abandoned. You don't need a perfect excuse to choose yourself. You just need the courage to listen to what your silence has been trying to scream. I may have been the one left behind on the dance floor, but I'm the one who walked away with rhythm in my step. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey. And now I'll ask you something. What moment in history do you think required someone to quietly walk away in order to truly change their life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And don't forget, you're watching Reddit Confessions. There's always more than one side to every story.